This is Mxnzplain. My name is Lebogang.
I'm Kabelo, and the two of us decided to begin this journey of just creating spaces for men to reflect on what it means to be a man in the 21st century. Our task is really to journey with men, listen to different stories, but to create an environment where we can all just learn and grow with each other. It's a journey.
Yeah. So if you're interested in mansplaining about their spirituality, their traumas, and all things important about being a man in the 21st century, this is the place for you to come to.
Mxnzplain is for me, for you, it's for all of us. So join in and be part of our journey.
Wait. Sorry, guys. I'm really sorry. How do we start? Like, okay, so there's no good evening, there's no good morning, because that's how I was stuck.
Can we keep it as natural as possible? We'll greet people like how we greet each other, like how you normally greet, but whatever. Or at least that's my preference. Yeah.
Dumelang and welcome to Mxnzplain. The name is Kabelo and I'm here with my brother Lebogang. Listen to this guy. He's not even allowing me to introduce him. But nonetheless, this is Mxnzplain. This is a platform and a space where it's just really, at this point, two gents in conversation about what it means to be a man in the 21st century. But I think the idea is that, throughout the journey, we'll introduce other faces and more voices to the conversation. But we're really wanting to create a space for people to reflect, to be in conversation, and to really just create an opportunity to be in conversation, more than anything else.
Yeah.
Right? But to be as real as possible.
Yeah.
And so Mxnzplain is for you, Mxnzplain is for us, Mxnzplain is for any man who is trying to figure out who and what they want to be in the world, specifically in the 21st century. And so today our topic is titled Back to Source, and it's inspired by a conversation that we had last week.
Yeah.
And Back to Source really was looking at, because both of us happen to be Christian, and it's something that we subscribe to and believe in quite a bit. And in our conversation, we stumbled on Adam as the original man, and we looked at what would it mean to actually go back to source, right? Like, what was Adam's relationship with God before Eve arrived? What type of conversations would they had? An idea is really not to figure out Adam, but it's to really look at Adam as the prototype of the first man, the original man.
Yeah.
So welcome to this episode. Hope it will be worthwhile for you.
Yeah. I think the other thing I want to mention is, we're not saying that we're experts on what manhood should look
Definitely
like.
not.
We're not experts, so that's number one. And number two, we're also, part of this conversation is as much a reflection and a learning for us from each other in the public space, which is really weird. But a reflection for us to learn, and then also to just share those learnings with people, and to quote unquote make it more comfortable for ourselves, at least for me, to be vulnerable with what it's taken for me to be the man that I am today, which is in no way perfect, but is much better than what I think I was as a man a few years back, right? So one of the things that you said that I find really interesting already is back to source being Adam's relationship with God before Eve. Why do you think it's important to look at it before Eve? Like, why is that a thing? As a base to kind of start this conversation.
I think for me it's just one of those, right? It's when you read scripture, for those who know the story of Adam and Eve, is that Adam was this man that God created from mud and was like the prototype human being, and had certain instructions and certain duties that he was given by God directly. And I think Eve comes into the story when God realizes that Adam is lonely, right? So when I think of back to source, I'm just like, what was the original thinking behind the male person by God, right? And I think, in the 21st century, there's all sorts of other things that we use to code what Bonna looks like or what Bosadi looks like, right? And we generally create these categories of a man behaves a certain way, dresses a certain way. Yesterday, I was picking up my daughter from a party, and one of the mothers there was like, in her house, there are pink jobs and there are blue jobs, which I found quite interesting, right? And blue jobs are the jobs that the man must do. So if there's a problem that needs to be solved, they look at it from the perspective of, is this a blue or a pink job, right? And if it's a blue job, then the man must step up and do what needs to happen. Okay. And I think for me, it's one of those, once again, you're like, it does not put anyone into a specific box. Yeah. It's just a way of how they've designed their relationship and their marriage, and it works for them, right? So to go back to source is to figure out what being a man looks like, okay. Right?
Or is meant to look like. If you're using
or is meant to look like, yeah.
Because if you're using the Bible as the manuscript of what a man should look like, then God already kind of made it clear with Adam and what he expected Adam to do, right? So maybe let's, I don't know, I want to focus a little bit more for now, like on those, what we think those things are. I mean, I'm in no way an expert on the Bible, but there are a couple of things that God expected of Adam, effectively, or the first man, which is like, okay, like take care of the earth, right? Like make sure this place is well taken care of. Go and like name the animals, right?
So duty.
When you name the animals, you're kind of saying, I'm giving you, this is your role, lion. Because naming something, you actually, it's not just giving it a name, it's also giving it a character.
Giving it a purpose.
Right? Okay. So like, name this thing.
Yeah.
And then it's like, here are a couple of things you must not do. It's like, don't eat from that tree, my man. Because, like, you know? So there's responsibility, there's obedience, and then there's like this is what it takes for you as this person that I've created to live among this place with me as your, effectively like your leader, as your main source, Adam. Okay, so that's back to source. How does that manifest itself today, do you think?
So look, I think being a man in the 21st century is tricky, right? Okay. Like I think when I encounter young men that I somewhat mentor or have coffees with, really, and who share their personal journeys, you realize a lot of the questions that they have, in their mid-20s or early 20s are very similar to the questions that I had in my mid and early 20s, right? When you chat to the more mature gentlemen who are like in their 50s, and you look at the, some of the decisions that they made in their 30s and then their 40s, and you're like, oh, flip, I came to that same, a stumbling block. I came to that same challenge at some point. And the more you reflect on it, it's just like, there are so many things that we share in common as men that we don't speak about publicly. And that is why majority of us repeat the same mistake over and over again, because we're not in conversation, right?
So you're saying kind of that men don't talk to each other, or they don't talk in general?
I think we do talk, right? Yeah. But it's not consistent, and it's not always as intentional, right? Like if you think about it, the conversations can range from cars to women to career to finances, but there's generally no structure, right? There's no structure, there's no agenda, there's no program or order of events.
But those also sound like good times conversations, actually.
Right. Okay. And I think there are very few moments where we're vulnerable with each other, right? Where I come to you and I'm like, go and label dude, I'm struggling in my marriage, guy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Because there's this need somewhat to keep face or to buy face, right? To seem like I'm in charge, I'm in control. When there are moments in my marriage where I'm just like, I actually don't know what I'm doing, right? But yet I'm not talking to my male friends who are married. Right. If anything, when those moments happen, I find myself wanting to call my friends who are not married and chill with them.
Why?
Right?
Why is that the thing?
It's escapism, right? And I think that for me that has always been the thing. So it becomes one of those. It's just like, what does it actually mean for me to be a man now, right? And I think that answer varies from when I was in my 20s to now in my technically late 30s. It has shifted quite a lot, right? And when my daughter arrived, it flipped even more than what it used to be, right?
I want to get into that a little bit, kind of how that's shifted. But first, I mean, to give a little bit of context for everybody else's kind of benefit. So I recently got married. It's actually my 1-year anniversary in like a week or 2 weeks from now.
And I was the priest at his wedding.
He was the priest at my wedding. That's funny, right? And then I'm expecting my first child. Right? And I'm like a little bit older than you, like early 40s, right? expecting my first child,
Yeah.
the majority of my good friends are unmarried guys,
Yeah.
right? So this for me is like completely new territory. Yeah. But the other new territory for me, which is number 4, which is part of the Adam conversation, is that, I mean, I've been called, or called myself, is how I put it, back to God, so back to source.
Yes.
So I'm having to learn these things that, or learn these new things that I hadn't placed much priority on in my life, but are clearly important, I guess, in my life now, but also clearly important to becoming a man, which is why this conversation actually started for me and you a while back, because you're actually my mentor in a lot of ways, right? So what would be interesting for me to find out from you, based on what you said, is how has your mindset shifted from, I guess, your 30s or your late 20s to now?
Yeah.
The other way of framing it is like pre-marriage to marriage to fatherhood. Like, how do you think your mindset shifted, and how has that affected or impacted your manhood?
Sure.
Or how you define manhood, rather.
So I think to be honest with you, like in my early 20s, and even in my mid, I think I was very arrogant. I was very somewhat irresponsible. Okay. I think I had priorities, and I knew.
You saying you're no longer arrogant?
A bit. Okay. Once in a while, it shows up, right?
Okay.
I think like a touch of arrogance is good once in a while.
Okay.
But I think the difference now is I'm more conscious of it, and somewhat have a better control than what I used to.
Okay.
Right. I think there were many moments in my 20s where I could have made very different decisions about how I treated people or how I behaved around people, which in hindsight you're like, sure, I could have been a better person.
Okay.
Right. And I think also in your 20s, right, it's that whole thing of trying to rediscover yourself, of trying to put a stamp on, this is the type of man that I am.
Yeah.
And I found it tiring because it didn't feel natural.
Right.
It felt like I was pretending. It felt like I was trying to, keep up with the Joneses.
Wait. So you being yourself at that point, you still identify it as somewhat unnatural.
Yes.
Okay.
Because I think in my mind I was just like, it was a point of evolution, and I'm still evolving now, right? But I think in my 20s, I was a bit reckless with my evolution. I was not as conscious of it, and I had not dealt with a lot of my own childhood traumas, right, and issues. And I think there was a lot of escapism with partying, with alcohol, with just multiple relationships, just being very nonchalant about how I went about life.
Okay.
And I think when you then when you meet someone where you're like, okay, I can see myself beyond a 1-year relationship, I can see myself beyond a 2-year space, I actually want to commit, right? You realize that I needed to almost disown some friends because some of them were not going to be good for my relationship, but also some of them were not going to be good for what I felt was what God was calling me to be and to do, right?
Okay.
Because my journey to the priesthood started in my mid 20s.
Okay.
And so certain decisions had to happen at that point in time. And one of those big decisions for me was I was very angry
as a young man.
And I realized that a lot of my behavior was that a lot of the behavior and the anger, the arrogance and the anger came from I wanted to show people who I was. And one of the biggest decisions, when I got called into ministry, I realized that I could not serve God if I had not forgiven my biological mother. Right. And I had issues with my biological mother because I felt at a key point in my life where I needed her, she was unavailable emotionally. And it didn't help that my dad is not in the picture. He was not in the picture then. He's not in the picture now. So now you're sitting there in your teens as a boy and you're just like, okay, so my own dad didn't want to be involved. My own mom is not really involved. I'm being raised by, yes, family members who care and love me, but they're not my people, right? Yeah. They're my people by virtue of being of family links.
Do you think that affected how you viewed yourself as a man then?
Heavily. Because I think everything I wanted to be was in the opposite direction of what I thought my dad was.
Okay.
Right? Because for me it was, he doesn't know responsibility. He was a coward.
Yeah.
And he never owned up to his mistake, right?
Okay.
Not that I was the mistake, but I think the mistake was the fact that when my mom conceived me, she was she was a grade 10 student,
young,
right? She was in standard 8.
Yeah.
So she herself was young and he was in matric.
Yeah.
And I understand some of the decisions that were made in that context, but I'm just like, you didn't own up though, right?
Okay. Let me ask you a question. Sorry, and this is not like I'm not interviewing him. Some of the things you're saying are actually deep. Interesting, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I hope you're comfortable to kind of dig this deep. So, in your mind, what do you think your father's character should have been if you link it back to source? So, given what you've just said, he didn't take responsibility, kind of left, wasn't there, still isn't there. If you frame it around this conversation we're having of like going back to source, it's like going back to who God believed you should be as a man, how should his character have been in your assessment?
So firstly, when my mom fell pregnant, right, my dad had an opportunity to go study in the States.
Yeah.
And I think like any 18, 19-year-old boy, I would have also just gone deuces, right? It's a big opportunity, right? So he went, studied in Ohio State actually, and I think for me, going back to source would have been, once he had his degree and once he had established himself, coming back and saying, you know what, when I was a child I made a mistake, and that mistake gave birth to a human being, and now that I am able to care for this entity or this being, I will show up, right? I'll be present. I will contribute what I need to contribute. I will make sure my son knows who I am.
So active parent
and be active, parent. Right? And for me, active parenting is not even about him living in the same house. It's just being conscious in the decision to raise your child. Right. And raising your child is not just about finances. It's about presence. Right. It's about being there. It's about listening. It's about that phone call. It's about that spending the day just chatting to you and listening to you, right? And I think for me, going back to source for him would have looked like that. Would have been one of those, it's like, I made a mistake there. That's
good.
Now I'm slightly more established. I'm more mature than what I was when this happened. Let me go back and actually reclaim my error, apologize, and then rebuild, right? And I think for me, that's what going back to source would have looked like for him.
I mean, given the society we live in, a lot of men, dudes, guys, boys, whatever you want to call them, who find themselves in similar situations as to what your dad would have found themselves in, actually do abandon their children, right? And they don't go back trying to help, etc., etc. What do you think, I mean, what does that do to society to have men growing up without their father figures? Because if that's part of the going back to source, back to responsibility, there must be some impact, right? And I guess some of the things we've, at least personally that I've seen, is we have a pandemic at the moment of young men, in fact even also grown men actually, who are somewhat lost, right? Because they don't have a quote unquote, or haven't had a father figure there. And father in this sense is like, father isn't biological father, biological father is like bailed, but also father as in like
God,
the Father. They don't know God the Father. And so there's almost like no framework, no structure of who to be as a man. One of my biggest worries, and it's a hypothesis, I'm still learning this thing, is that because the men are lost, or don't have these father figures, or don't know much about fathers, you can't expect then to build a strong nation. And I'm categoric, if I focus at black men, it's almost impossible to say, I'm going to take this nation of black people, take it back to its glory that it's meant to be, if you don't have a strong base of men who actually take up their responsibilities, actually take up the roles that they're meant to take up in society. And it's not laying blame on the fathers, although I think we should, if we're like completely honest about stuff, but maybe they didn't know better. The question I have for you is how then did you overcome that to become the somewhat responsible young man you are today, even in the absence of those kind of like of a father figure per se? Yes, you may have had people around you, but your biological father was not there. And even before, And what's the difference between who you were before the call of God and after the call of God?
I'm less angry.
Okay.
And somewhat, I could even say less entitled to spaces and to the things that I have or the people that I have around me.
And this is because of your calling.
Yeah, because I think for me I think one of the biggest things that I had to learn was that there was no way I was going to be a good priest if I had not forgiven the two people who I felt caused me the most harm, right?
Okay.
And that was my biological mom and my biological dad, right?
Okay.
So I had to start with forgiving these two guys for me to be able to actually accept myself, right? But I think what made a huge difference for me was, there was a point where in my marriage actually, where I was becoming quite destructive,
okay.
right? And then I made the decision to say, you know what, actually, it was actually in conversation with my wife where she paused me and she's like, yo, dude, this is not who I fell in love with. Whatever it is that's happening here, you need to figure it out because I'm not going to sit around for this.
Was this before the hairstyle?
Right.
Or as the hairstyle?
The hairstyle is part of the fun.
Okay, yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And I think so and what happens there at that point in time was the decision to see a psychologist permanently.
Okay.
And I started seeing alone.
Okay.
Yeah. So I then started seeing a psychologist, and when we started off, it was once a week. And I think the first 6 months were the worst, right? I'd come back from these sessions, I'd be physically drained. I'd be very not interested in much. Because for me, I was just one of those like crap.
Yeah.
There's a lot of wounds that I need to deal with, right? And I think it was engaging and encountering that young boy who was hurt, that young boy who was ignored, that young boy had to prove himself over and over again, and that young boy that wanted to just be loved. And I realized that a lot of my behavior, even as a young adult, was exactly that, right? Everything I achieved was so that people could congratulate me and pay attention to me, because from a young age I learned, if I'm not successful, if I'm not top of my class, if I'm not performing, people don't realize that I exist. So in order for people to know that I'm there, I must be the best dressed, best spoken person, best this, best that, have as many degrees as possible, right?
So validation
because validation was external and not something that came from me.
You think a lot of dudes suffer from that?
I think all of us do, man. Like the more I chat to gents, I realize that we don't validate young boys, man. We don't validate men in society. Like I look at my little girl, right? There's a lot of validation that goes to females, and females grow up with a very different level of confidence and validation from the mothers and the women around them, and even some of the men around them, right? And young boys don't have that. Young boys grow up with that whole thing of we're so duty oriented that even when we've done well at something, we don't take time to reflect and celebrate. It's just one of those, okay, yeah, sharp, we're finished. What's next? Right. So it's like on to the next one, on to the next one. But I'm also interested in hearing like the type of man that you're finding yourself to be now, right? And the young boy that you were. How have the two met each other?
How have the two met each other? So I don't know if they've met. I almost feel like they've actually gone in separate directions because of the growth that I've had to have. So when I was younger, I've always been somewhat driven, very ambitious as like a young guy. So I'm the oldest child between my dad and my mom. So I've always had like a leadership position almost thrust upon me. That hasn't changed. Right?
We have the same thing in common.
Exactly, right. In fact, it's gotten more pronounced since my dad passed away, right? And that has its own challenges, but it's part of growth. I think
so you have to be the man of the house, technically.
Back to source. Yeah. So it's almost like man of the family as opposed to man of the house. And that's been interesting. So, but the difference between me now and when I was a lot younger is I did seek a lot of external validation from my father, because my dad was my hero for a very long, for a lot of my childhood and like youth. But it was also like, I know now it was like heroism that was uninformed from my part. because I mean a lot of things I didn't know, and we can chat about that a bit later. But also, you know, I wasn't the coolest guy growing up, but I really wanted to be cool. You know, like I was just this nerdy dude, bro. Like like now that was my thing, you know, books, games, whatever. And then, you know, came a time in my life where women became a big part of like social acceptance, I guess, and I messed up a lot there. Today, because of a bunch of things that have happened, which I'll speak to, I'm married. I got married quite late, compared to most people in society. Having my first child, which is also pretty late. I'm an entrepreneur, but my entrepreneurism has become much better over the last 2 or 3 years in terms of my focus and the things like my reason for doing things has changed, and I think that's really important. And then also my relationship with like God and this spirituality that follows that. And kind of we can speak to that as well. So that almost polar opposite of who I was when I was younger, with regards to responsibility, integrity, and the things that I'm willing to kind of do or not do in the world. And I feel it's weird. I feel like I'm more a man now than what I was when I was younger. Even though when I was younger, I'm a cheater. This is one I can. Like I had a lot more almost like manly type relationships than what I do now. But it's a consequence of change. I think, right? So what's led me to here? A couple of things. So one, I mean, I got quite disappointed, and I was disappointed with my father for a very long time when I found out some of the stuff, kind of, you know, family, how he treated my mom. My dad was my hero, still is actually today, even though I've learned. But now the heroism is a lot more informed, because I'm like fallible guy, but kept the promises that mattered the most. Wasn't perfect, but you know, trended towards trying to be perfect later on in his life, which I think is great. Because I think part of being a man, as you mentioned somewhat glibly, is being able to realize that you have traumas, addressing those traumas at some point in your life, and then taking the lessons that you learned from those traumas, whether it be through seeing a psychologist or talking with people that you trust, whatever, taking those lessons, infusing them into your life, and then saying, I'm willing to make the necessary changes for me to become who I want to become. I think my dad did that like quite late in his life before he passed on. The big thing he did, which for me really blew my mind, was a couple of months before my father died, like 4 months before he died, he accepted his spiritual gifting. He always knew he had it. Like when I look at him now, I'm like, I look at my family, I look at the background, I'm like, there's no way this thing didn't exist. He accepted it. At St. John. Literally became a man of the cloth, or was learning to become a man of the cloth at like 69, right? 4 months later, God decided to call him. But I think that happened purposefully. So I think, and this may sound weird, but this is genuinely in my heart is what I believe. I believe God is like, where now I need you back to source, up here. Because now you've realized that this thing is a real thing. And placed him up there in the heavens, and took me and put him in his place. And said, you, as in Lebogang, you must now go figure out this thing and go and do what I need you guys to do in order to kind of build your family, bring your guys back to me as your family, but also this type of conversations that we're having now. And so that's the back to sourceness. So do I, like, the things that have made me become, at least in my own kind of perspective, more of a man, are polar opposite to what I thought they would be. I've had to be super vulnerable with myself, with my best friend, which is my wife. So, you know, there's a story around that. I've had to learn to trust in, like, my faith in God has grown probably 100 times in the last three years, and that's not normal for me because I always trust in things I see. I can't see God, like I'm literally. At least I can't see him with my eyes open.
Yeah,
it's a different story with my eyes closed, right? So is that. And I've had to learn, I'm an introvert, naturally. I like to keep to myself. And I'm a big believer in me. Like, I bet on me all the time, right? I've had to learn to bring people in a lot more. But to also have, like, high integrity when you bring those people in. You know what I mean? So, I share a lot of stuff with you, not just because you're, like, Father Kabelo. Like, okay, you're my dude.
We get along.
You know, we get along. You're my dude. But, but part of our getting along has been because, I'm comfortable to speak to you about things that hit really, really deep. Another big part of my being a man today is I want my marriage to work.
Right.
You understand?
Yeah.
I want my relationship with the woman that God has chosen for me, just like God chose Eve for Adam. I want it to work and to be good until I die.
Okay.
I don't want to do this halfway thing where, so that's part of what I guess my journey to manhood has been, and therefore questioning. Yeah. Like, actually, why this Mxnzplain thing, Yeah. One of the things that was missing in getting me here is we didn't talk about the stuff as guys, And in fact, when you start talking about it, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, let's talk girls, cars, money, like whatever, you know what I mean? Like, the minute you're like, let's talk God.
Yeah, let's talk about our success, right?
Let's talk about, success. Stuff. And sometimes there's nothing wrong with it. It's like, there's really nothing wrong with talking about those things. For me, it's the depth of your conversation should not be limited to just that. Yeah. If I'm going to call you my brother, which is what we call each other as dudes, like, this one's my brother. But I can't talk to you about the difficulty I'm having at home with my relationships with, like, my siblings. Yeah. Or I can't talk to you about, look, man, I'm starting to dream really wild things. Yeah. Spirituality related stuff. Or I can't talk to you about, I have no idea what to do with the amount of money I'm making to make sure that my family is well taken care of. Yeah. We often don't have those chats, And it's weird, man. I think people in general are smart. People in general have the ability to do whatever they want or whatever they put their minds to. But I believe us as young black men, if we come together and are willing to have those conversations deliberately and then to also learn from those conversations, nothing in the world can stop us.
So I was going to say, I think a lot of the times where we don't share some of these things with some of our male friends, right? Because it's easy to speak about cars and money, right? And even money, we're very selective. We're very selective on what we tell you about money, right? We tell you the things that we can buy, or we show you the things we can buy, but we don't entirely tell you how much we have, right? Because and I think there's an element of trust there, right? Is, can I actually trust you to tell you where I am financially, right? Or do I just keep playing the game, right? Play the game, have the right sneaker, have the latest car, be seen in the right spaces with the right people, and I think that's part of the reason why some of the relationships that we have with each other as men are so fickle, right? Yeah. And it's not that we don't care about each other, right? And that's what has always been weird for me is you could be friends with the same gent for many years, right? And you trust each other, but know very little about the things that make you vulnerable, right?
Why then do you say that it's not that we don't care about each other? Because isn't caring about someone being willing, one, to be vulnerable with them, but also to have the super tough conversations because you care about their livelihood.
True. But at the same time, there's somewhat a need to keep up appearanrances. Okay. Right.
Even with the people closest.
Weirdly enough, sometimes we do that, right? And I've seen that with some of the people that I was friends with at some point. Yeah. Where there were situations where I mean, so specifically, there's a group of gents that I grew up with, and we were friends from as early as like grade 3, right? And there was almost like, I think 12 to almost 15 of us in that little group. And like zone 9, the nickname Yarona actually,
Yeah.
right? And all of us we had very similar things in common, right? So from liking fashion and sneakers, and all of us wanted to be popular, right? Even though some of us were more nerds than we were the good-looking guy that could be popular in high school. But I get about God works in miracles. Your looks show up much later in life.
Still waiting for mine to show up, bro.
No, they. That's why you got a wife now. But what I found was that there was also a high level of hiding myself with those gents, right? Even though we knew each other as kids, there were big parts of me that were hidden, right?
Why, Kabelo?
I think the part of me didn't trust him, right? Because I was just like, everyone is in it for themselves,
right?
And I think sometimes when you grow up in the township, you see that quite a lot.
Right.
Is a lot of people are very much self-interested. And when you meet somebody who actually who cares and wants to invest, it's just like, whoa, right? Why are you trying to get close to me? And I think out of the 12 gents who were in that group, right? I think I grew close to one specifically, right? And I think, and you know, Pielo, like myself and Pielo have been friends for almost 26, 27 years now. And we had to learn how to be vulnerable with each other.
Nice.
Right? And we didn't do it in high school, but literally towards the end of our degrees, that's where we started sharing more about what was happening in our lives, right? And what was interesting was that even with him, you know, growing up, Pielo was never really a religious person. And when I felt, or when I got to a point, I was like, okay, God is calling me to be a priest. You know, Pielo was very much an atheist.
Right.
And we'd always have conversations about why he thinks of the world and religion and spirituality the way he does. And what was amazing was that even in my journey, you know, when I got ordained, he was there.
Right.
Throughout the whole process of me going through this, my first sermon, he was there, right? And I feel like he wasn't there for God. He was there because his home was going through something, and he committed to the journey, right? And I think that's what real male friendships look like, right? Where you move past trying to pretend around each other, right? Trying to buy face, where, you know, I can call and say to you, dude, I cannot groza, or yo, my man, my mom just called me, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is happening. What should I do, right? And for me, that's where the brotherhood begins. And when that support structure begins to come into place, that is where we actually achieve a whole lot more, both with each other and with the people around us. And I'm not saying that it was a perfect setup, because we've made mistakes, we've made errors, we've hurt people in the process, but I think it was, once again, we grew up together. And as we redefine what being a man looks like, you know, we get close to each other, and sometimes we step back a bit. But what is interesting is that even when you were speaking, like a part of me was just like, there's clearly something highly important about spirituality when it comes to manhood, right? Because, and not even just manhood, when it comes to human beings purely, because you look at women, like churches are full of women, right?
Wait, hold on. What's that clip saying? We're spiritual beings having a what?
A human experience. Yeah, right. And I think when you don't realize the importance of spirituality in your life, you fall for glitter in the name of gold, right? You see things that are sparkly and shiny, and you think to yourself, "It's all nothing."
And you're saying most men aren't spiritual?
I think if we don't claim it, we're not. But I do believe that most of us are actually all of us are spiritual. And if you don't claim it, you deny yourself certain gifts and certain points of consciousness, right? And I think that's what we struggle with. But I think let's just take a moment just to pause and see if where we pick up from here.
Look, I mean, I think I want to talk about the spirituality thing
a
little bit, because I think it's important. So let's maybe spend 2 or 3 minutes on that, specifically for men.
Okay.
Because remember, if you're saying back to source,
yes.
which is back to God.
Yeah.
So Adam back to God, right? If you think about it, Adam is actually not the first human being.
No.
Right? He's the first spirit being that God made on the earth. The first human beings are his children.
Yeah.
If you think about it.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. Cain and Abel.
Yes.
Effectively, first human beings. So as Banna, if we don't somehow have a relationship with the spirit world or spirituality that is linked back to God.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, there's a lot of stuff happening out there that's not linked back to God.
Yes.
Conversation for another day. If we don't do that, again, back to my hypothesis, that it then becomes difficult to build a nation.
Yes.
Right? And if in any household, kind of, I think where you were going with the churches are filled with women, great, because you need someone to be holding up
the spirituality of the house. Yeah.
The house, the fort, the nation.
Yeah.
Right? But if the dudes are not there, typically what happens in a lot of black households in particular is the wife, woman, mother, daughter will go to church.
Yeah.
The guys will go kawash. Right? And they come back home and they can't connect on that spiritual thing. So then what happens in the home with spirituality, especially if you know or if you believe that your marriage is kept together by God.
Yeah.
Right? Or by, your guides that are sent to you by God. What's the consequence of that when it comes to manhood in your assessment? Or just when you look at people in the church? I mean, you're in the church, bro. Yeah. So what's the consequence of that exactly?
I think you become a disaster. Because I won't lie to you. Like when I reflect on many moments where I lost focus on my spirituality and my relationship with God and wanted to be in control, that's where I've created the biggest messes. Right?
Okay.
Yet when I submit myself to not being in control, but allowing my gifts to show up and to do what I believe God guides me to do in certain moments and in specific periods of my life, things have happened without me trying too hard, right? Because the focus is less on and it's more about, maintaining that closeness with God, maintaining my meditation, my ability to pray, my ability to listen. So I'm one of those people, if I'm not in a good space, I will listen to the feel when I'm running. That's my moment to pray. That's my moment to
feel when you're running.
My man, I can't listen to hip hop when I'm running for some odd reason. Right. The run breaks. Right. Whereas when I'm listening to the feel and spirituals, there's a level of comfort and a sense of clarity.
You run faster
in my running. Yes, weirdly enough. Yeah. And I think for me, it's redefining what prayer and being with God looks like. Okay. It is not just about going to church every Sunday. Okay. It is about creating consistent and intentional moments in your day, every day, just to connect. Okay. Right. And for me,
being the priest of your household.
And being the priest of your household, right? Okay. And which is a conversation that we're going to have in one of our episodes, where we really discuss what does being the priest of your household look like? What is the legacy of that presence? Because I think, if you want to rebuild society, all beings within that society need to reclaim their spirituality and reclaim the fact that they were created by an entity strong and way more powerful than they are. Okay. And the best thing they can ever be and do in the world is to show up, to love, to care, to nurture, and to protect.
Okay. So a big part of what we're saying is it's almost impossible for you to say that umunna, like bunna baha, without the presence yamudi.
Never.
Right? It's not happening. No, basically. Okay.
And how you subscribe to that God for me is not important, right? Whether it is through African spirituality, through Christianity, through being Muslim, Hindu, or Buddhist.
As long as it leads you back
there needs to be a relationship with the Creator.
With the Creator of the heavens. So that's kind of one thing we're saying. The number two thing that I think we've been saying in this conversation is it's important to talk to each other as men, as dudes, about kind of what we're going through, vulnerability, etc., and then that's kind of what we need to do as dudes. And let's pick this up in some of the other episodes that we get into. Owakhe.
But yeah,
This is good, man.
thank you very much, man. Hopefully in the next one we'll dig deeper. But yeah, this is Mxnzplain.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us, and yeah, we hope you will be part of this journey, not just by listening, but by being in conversations with the men around you, with the young boys around you, and continuing to build and figuring out what it means to be a man in the 21st century. But most importantly, is how do we get back to source without a strong and solid spiritual foundation. This is Mxnzplain.
This is Mxnzplain. Thank you.